So hi everyone, welcome to this panel being presented by Brian Broll. He's going to go ahead and kick it off, get started.
All right, so I'm going to be moderating the Snap extension panel. I wanted to keep it somewhat open and fluid. So if people have any questions after we get started and do introductions and things like that they'd like to ask panel members, I think it would be great. Just raise your hand and I'll give the floor over to you. But without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to our panelists to introduce themselves. So let's start with just a kind of arbitrary order here. Devin.
Okay. I'm Devin Jean. I'm a grad student in Vanderbilt. And I guess as far as Snap extensions go, I have been working a lot with NetsBlocks, which is an extension of Snap, and then also making a few services in NetsBlocks. So basically extensions of extensions and some various things like that.
So if anyone is interested in Devin's work and making extensions of extensions of extensions, I'm sure he could post a link in the chat or something like that.
Yeah.
So next, let's have Thomas Price introduce himself.
All right. Hey, everyone. I'm Thomas Price. I'm an assistant professor at NC State University, and I've been working with Snap for going on maybe 7 years now, creating extensions. Brian, did you want us to give a short demo now, or?
I think that would be great.
Sure. So I can give a whirlwind tour of some of the things I've worked on. I'm going to go into not nearly enough detail to actually explain everything, but just to give you a sense of what can be done with Snap, though you probably already have a good sense. So this is one of the first things I ever made. It's a system to give hints and feedback to students working in Snap. It's called iSnap. I'm going to put links to all this later in the chat. But the idea is that as students work, they can have blocks that get highlighted to tell them if it's maybe in the wrong place for a given assignment, or ask for a hint that suggests a next step for them to take when constructing their program. And as part of building this, I also had to make logging work. So one of the things I have that's been most useful from a research perspective is keeping detailed logs of all the interactions that students do in their programs. So if we open up a random project, then we can see sort of a step-by-step set of all the things that this person in my demo server has done, and we can scroll through the actions they've taken and see what their code looked like over time. So this is really useful to understand how students work. But I've done some other things. More recently, I've had a lot of fun integrating a game and a physics engine into Snap. So here's an example of a little Angry Birds style demo that we can create in Snap. This is not using vanilla Snap. This is integrating some extensions, as we've talked about. And even the ability to record lessons in Snap and have them played back so that you can scroll through and add slides and capture all of it in a fully interactive Snap window that the student can actually interact with as you're working. So that's just a real quick whirlwind overview of some of the things that I've worked on. A lot of these are both client-side in the sense that they modify Snap's JavaScript, but they also have some sort of server-side backend. So that's something that we can talk about today as well. And I'll throw that into the chat.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. Next, Tom Lauwers, would you like to say a few words? And demos are welcome and stuff as well.
Yeah, sure. I'll do a demo also. But hi, everybody. I'm Tom Lauwers. I'm the founder of BirdBrain Technologies, which makes the Finch and the Hummingbird robotics kit. And I've been building extensions for Snap since 2013, doing physical computing. So 2013, we developed the first kind of extension for getting the Hummingbird kit and the Finch robot working, old versions of it, in Snap, and have been kind of walking along that path for the last 9 years now. And it's been an interesting evolution, both in terms of the software that was developed. Originally, we had to kind of create servers that you had to install on the desktop or on your computer in order to communicate with Snap. And then later, we figured out that you could do web apps. And then most recently, we actually, my wife Chrissy figured out how to embed a web Bluetooth directly in regular Snap to communicate with physical computing devices. So that's the demo I'll do right now. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, I'll just share a Chrome window. So here we are in regular Snap, and I have a microbit. It is running the BirdBrain Bluetooth firmware, which is firmware that we developed in order to communicate. Both the Finch robot and Hummingbird kit work. The current versions work with the microbit. So this Bluetooth firmware is basically our way of communicating with our robots, but it also works with standalone microbits. So even though it's plugged in over USB, it's just creating power. And so let me, oops, sorry about the dog. So let me put in just the starter project. So it creates a new library of blocks for microbit Bluetooth. And so I can, if I click on any of these blocks on their own, oh, sorry, I need to turn on JavaScript extensions. So let me do that. All right, so if I click on any of these blocks, right now it's like, oh, there's no microbits connected. So it pulls up this little window. And from there, we can actually connect to 3 different microbits running this. So I can hit connect, and then I can pair, makes a little connection sound. And now if I press the block again, now it's printing hello. And so the blocks that we have control over or commands for are all of the microbit sensors. So we can read all the buttons, so we could read the state of button A. If I push it, it'll read true. We can read the accelerometer. So here's a thing like if I put its screen up, now it's true, otherwise it's false. Can read the compass. We can control the display. So we can draw things on the display. And then we can also set the pins. So pin 0, 1, and 2 to an analog value, so 0 to 100%. And we can also read those pins. So I could read microbit pin A. Right now it reads 5, nothing's connected to it. So that makes sense that it would just be a random thing. So one thing that you can do with something like this is an accelerometer grapher. I hit space on this. So it's now graphing the accelerometer values in my Snap window as I shake it. And one of the nice things about this being over Bluetooth is I could have this thing be 15 feet away, or I could stick it into an egg drop experiment, or, drop it or whatever and see what happens to the accelerometer values. So yeah, this is all within regular Snap. It doesn't require any installation. It only works in Chrome and Edge because it relies on web Bluetooth, but beyond that, it doesn't have many, and it requires native Bluetooth on the laptop, but more and more laptops have that. So it will work on probably 90% plus of the laptops that are out there, laptops or. So yeah, I just wanted to do that demo, and I will put the example project link in the chat so that you guys can play with it at your own time, on your own time. Yeah. So
awesome.
Stop sharing. Oops.
That's really cool, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's very cool. Thanks for the demo. Next, this leaves us with Bernat as our last panelist before we start jumping into some of the questions. Bernat, would you like to introduce yourself, maybe show off a demo or two?
Yep, so I'm Bernat Romagosa, based in Barcelona. I'm part of the Snap team. And I work at SAP, but before that, I wrote a bunch of Snap extensions, modifications, I would say. I shall say now that we have actual Snap extensions. I think we should call all of these modifications or something like that. Let me show you 3 of them really quickly. The first one was called Snappy. Can you see it? And it was built to interact with APIs, and we had this map interface. I'm happy to say that this extension, this modification has been basically superseded by Snap right now, so we can forget about it. But back then we didn't have any maps API in Snap or any way to query APIs. So we had to build that ourselves. That was while I was working at the City Lab. Then I also made Snap for Arduino, which is now being maintained by Joan Guillen, who is maybe in the audience. And Snap for Arduino is a modification of Snap that lets you connect to Arduino boards. We made it in 2013. So back then it was pretty new. Right now there are thousands of ways to connect with the real world from within Snap, but back then I believe it was one of the first ones. And you can make all sorts of projects with Snap for Arduino. It's still being used, although we're trying to also make it obsolete. And the last one hasn't been made obsolete, and it's a pity because it's getting obsolete by our lack of time. But there's still nothing out there like BeetleBlocks. BeetleBlocks is a modification of Snap that I helped build together with Eric Rosenbaum and Dux Koschitz back then at the MIT. And the way it works is it's just like regular Snap, but you only have one sort of sprite. It's a 3D sprite, and it's a beetle, not a turtle, because a beetle can walk on the plane, but it can also go digging underground or fly. So there you get the third dimension. And basically you can command it to do things like move, rotate, and stuff, but you can also command it to build shapes, such as this tiny sphere. Let me actually reset and do that a bunch of times so you can see what it's about. So let me repeat that, let's say 24 times, since I'm rotating 15, that will make 360 degrees, and I get this ring. And then by playing a little bit with the parameters, I get a full ring, and I'll rotate X also afterwards, so I can get something like Perus. I can also go in turbo mode to make it faster. And let's also change the scale at before each new ring, so we get something like snail shell. And there are several blocks-based approaches to 3D, but none of them are interactive like BeetleBlocks is, and none of them are turtle-based, are first-person based. So you in other environments, you have to think about coordinates and things like that, which are really tricky when you get a third dimension to think about, especially for younger kids. Whereas first-person stuff is really much easier to grasp. When you think of yourself as being the beetle and turning around space, that's much easier than thinking about X, Y, and Z coordinates and volumes. Also, of course, this is meant to be downloaded as a 3D model and printed. And that's all I wanted to show you.
That's beautiful. Awesome. Well, thank you, Bernat. Do you want to post some links too in the chat for people who want to dig a little bit more deeper?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So with that, let's jump into some of the questions. So as a first question, what is your favorite or one of your favorites Snap extensions? And let's start with Devin.
So some of the types of extensions that I like, because it's, there's a lot of them, it's hard to pick like a top one, but a lot of the ones that I like are the ones that do robotics or accessing hardware devices. So and even just like 3D graphics in that sense. So I like the any 3D plotting things. Turtle Stitch is also an interesting one for creating 2D patterns in vector graphics for like laser printers. So I'd say those and some of the various robotics ones, like there's one for Sphero, which is nice if you can get a hold of the robots and And there's also one in NetsBlocks that we've made. Another graduate student has been working on called RoboScape Online for doing virtual robotics. So that's also really interesting. Just a lot of robotic stuff is I would pick as a general category.
So Thomas, how about yourself? What are your favorite Snap extensions, or what type of Snap extension would you love to see? So real or imaginary?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's a little bit of a cop-out, but as an instructor, the one I use most often is NetsBlocks, and I really appreciated seeing the students engage with that and be able to take Snap to the next level. I don't know if that counts as an extension because it's sort of its own platform now, but yeah, and the fact that it's seamless, the fact that I can just go to it and it more or less works as an instructor, I really appreciate that. As a dev, I think, oh goodness, what would I love to see? I think my dream extension to Snap would be something that, oh goodness. I think one thing that I would really love is, I know we have a lot of sort of machine learning and data themed extensions already. And I would love to see, sort of building on that, things that connect, that allow students to sort of take some of that data analysis and bring data in from their communities and out into their world. I think students want to feel powerful when they're doing computing. They want to feel like these big ideas that they have for what they want to see in the world, that they can make it happen. And I think while it's really fun to make a game or something, I think data is one area where students can actually interface with their communities and produce insights. So I have to say, I'm not the most versed on the existing extensions in that space, so I should probably spend more time checking them out.
Well, anyone who's attending who has any suggestions can always post them in the chat. Awesome. Well, thank you, Thomas. Next, Tom Lauwers, same question. What's your favorite Snap extension, or what would you like to see? So again, real or imaginary or yet to come?
I mean, I really enjoyed NetsBlocks and the work that was done, like during at the beginning of the pandemic, we figured out how to use NetsBlocks to control robots remotely. And that was a lot of fun. And it really did help some teachers in 2020 still do physical computing, even if you had to watch the computer or the robot over the internet. And the fact that you could do that and NetsBlocks worked, and it worked well enough that I could, kind of do really very little work to get the robots working in it, and then hand that off to a teacher, who I'm not necessarily expecting has a ton of programming experience, right? Like the teachers who ended up doing this were definitely early adopters and they were comfortable with blocks-based programming, but they weren't necessarily people who have done any sort of professional software development. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. So
yeah, I thought that was a super cool project. I played with it a little bit myself. Bernat, what's your favorite extension that you'd love to see?
So my favorite one has to be, besides BuildBlocks, because I have a soft spot for it, it has to be Turtle Stitch, because a lot of it is because of the wonderful community around it. I think it's the community that we should strive to have in Snap and in every other language, actually. And what I would like to have is some of these extensions that we're showing today. Some of them, some have moved away from Snap so much that it's impossible to reconcile them. But I would love to see most of those moved as actual Snap extensions. So if I had infinite time, one thing that I would do is to try and move Snap for Arduino back into Snap now that we have web serial, at least in Chrome. So that would be easily feasible. And also partially BuildBlocks could be reimagined as a Snap extension. You wouldn't have the full UI modification, but you could think of having a 3D sprite or a 3D stage that you could switch between or something like that. So that's what I would like to see, more of these extensions, the ones that are not so far
Yeah.
from Snap. Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
pretty
sure.
hard
Yeah.
to,
I'm sorry.
no, it's pretty hard to think of Netvlogs as Snap extensions because of all the different layers that it touches, but parts of it could certainly be turned into extensions.
Definitely, yeah. I think that would be great. I share the same type of sentiment that I'd love to minimize the diff. Even if I can't merge them all in, I'd love to try to make the extension and the changes made by the extension minimal, because not to kind of segue into Ken Khan's question from the chat here, but he wanted he said he'd like to hear a discussion of keeping up with Snap versions like hyperblocks, and to share it, I guess I think I forgot to mention that I am I'm on the Netsbox team, so I am not completely impartial as this moderator. But to give a couple, just to give my 2 cents before we can open this up to others as well, I totally agree with Ken Khan's observation of the pain with sometimes keeping up with Snap versions. When you've made these huge changes, like Bernat's talking about, like in Netsbox and in BeetleBlocks, it can be pretty tough. Like I know Netsbox right now is maybe on fork from Snap version 6.4. And if you, as you noticed, we're now on Snap version 8, which means there's a lot of work to do. And so like we have hyperblocks, but there are a lot of exciting new features and things like that would be great to be able to support. And that's one of the things actually that motivated me that motivated me to kind of propose this panel, is that there are so many things to talk about, both from imagining new extensions, how we could use ones, how we can minimize this pain so more people can explore without having to take on quite the burden of updating and migrating and all that kind of stuff, because some of those things still have a bit of friction. But I'll open it up to anyone else who might want to weigh in on keeping up with Snap versions.
Yeah, I'll just mention that part of why we are not maintaining BeetleBlocks anymore is exactly that. It's way too much of a hassle to keep up with new versions, especially since we've modified so much about Snap that every merging of a new version would mean hours and days of checking what has changed and what has not.
Yeah, same thing here. And I think so. I've been involved as a consumer and as a creator in other modding communities, they would call them, rather than extensions, but it's the same idea. And I think a standard approach is to pair an extension with a version number, and that way you could still officially support an extension. But when Snap updates, it wouldn't be requisite that every extension be updated at the same time. And then, that would involve something that enables older versions of Snap to be available. But I don't, since it's all static content, that's really not very hard. So it might be that it lists extensions that are for older versions of Snap, but then it warns the user like, hey, this will require you to use Snap 7. And then it just pops it open in a new window or something. I think that could be very powerful as a way of saying, yes, you can build your extension, but when it's time to go to Snap 9, you don't have to update with us or everything breaks.
Yeah, for sure. So Brian Harvey has a question. Have we made changes that broke old extensions? I think yes.
Yes. and if I could build on that, the reason is because Snap, at least until recently, didn't have a public API, right? And the public API that now exists is still a pretty tiny file, a tiny subset of Snap functionality. And so we're over here overwriting a bunch of private functions that we mostly understand, but only 90% with our own logic. And so, you know, the Snap dev team very reasonably might change one of those functions. And when they do that, they'll refactor their code. But there's no way for that to trickle down to the extension community. So, you know, another approach is to think about like, you know, clear documentation about every single change, but that just seems unreasonable. And I think in other extension communities, what happens is that there's a public API that covers 80% of what you might need to do in an extension, and that we guarantee functionality. And if we change it, we make it backwards compatible, and we advertise the change clearly. And sure, there's still 20% you can't do with that API where you're overwriting the core Snap logic, and that you have to maintain yourself. Now, there's a huge amount of dev work that goes into creating that in the first place, but once it's made, it's not that hard to maintain. So I don't know how that would come about, but that I think would make it viable for extensions to more seamlessly integrate.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
I mean, people who write an extension today will have it much easier, I think, than what we've had it. And proof of it is the Math+C extensions that I helped build first, and then we had to rewrite, and then we had to rewrite again. And by the third time, we already had the extension mechanism in Snap, and we could, and Zach did that work, Zach Kohler. He could use the extension mechanism to write most of it. So I think people who are writing extensions now will have it much easier to keep up with Snap.
Yeah. So Bernat, for someone who hasn't made an official extension before, and maybe that describes most of the audience as well, where is a good starting point? Like, is there good documentation to point to? Is there like, how would you recommend someone get started with that?
Yeah, there is this extensions. I'll need to fetch it, but there is documentation about how to write an extension. Let me fetch it actually, while we talk about something else.
I know on the Netsbox side of things, we had kind of in the theme of Devin's extension of an extension of an extension kind of comment. We had for a while anyway, I had an extension of Snap that just had undo. And then I had an extension of that, which was Netsbox. And then another team at Vanderbilt had an extension of that, which was C2 STEM, adding physics and stuff like that. So it was kind of wild following the whole path. And then eventually the Snap undo and Netsbox were just kind of merged, just because it was already adding a whole lot of overhead and extra work to be maintaining both of those. When Snap would update, we'd update one and then update the next one and update the next one. So I know we had been working on and have some, there is an extensions mechanism in Netsbox that's used for like auto grading or things like this physics extension, although it doesn't cover all the functionality because it's closer to what Thomas was describing, where it's really hard to cover full functionality when people start messing with the stage and adding UI changes to arbitrary places and things like that. Let's see. All right. Well, I want to make sure I'm not missing any other comments in the chat. So I'll take a quick moment here. All right. So another, let's see, another related comment is along the same direction of extensions. Some people have been working on things like some integrations of Snap with other tools like Moodle and such. I'm curious if there are any other integrations that people might find interesting, either for or useful for teachers and things like that. To give a little bit more context about one of the reasons why I find this question interesting is that one of the downsides of there being so many extensions that are almost in their own silo is that sometimes some of them develop integrations with useful platforms or tools to make it easier to use or teach, or makes teachers' life easier. Like even the like the micro world stuff that Bernat did with the Math Plus C project, which I actually feel obligated not to probably have explain it, but Bernat would be better suited to do that. So I'm going to finish phrasing this question and turn it over to Bernat to explain micro worlds. But one of the next questions that I'd like to ask is really about if there are other sorts of integrations or things that people might that would find interesting in various these Snap or Snap extensions. And then if they have any, just keeping it open-ended about any ideas to try to make it easier for people to reuse these types of extensions or features available for specific extensions across all extensions. Now, while everyone's thinking about that one, I'm going to turn it over to Bernat to explain what micro worlds are and what that work is before we jump in.
Maybe Paul would be the right person to answer that question. I followed his directions.
Sure. So Paul, would you like to be an honorary panel member?
Sure. Actually, ages ago, so a micro world is a Snap, but with a bunch of things hidden so that brand new users don't get distracted or fall into traps, or, you know, if it's going to be run by a teacher with a class, the teacher can't even, no matter how knowledgeable the teacher is, and the teacher may not be, no matter how knowledgeable the teacher is, if 15 kids fall into a trap, you can't help them all at once. So it hides a bunch of things that the kids don't need, presents for them in the palette all of the blocks they do need, and makes an opportunity for some kind of question, some kind of activity. You know, in our particular case, we would pose puzzles to the kids, specifically in mathematics, for them to use the various blocks to solve. The whole idea of a micro world is narrowing the field, so to get rid of distractions, but provide everything the kids need. And eventually you open it up and offer more stuff. And meanwhile, they're learning raw Snap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I thought micro worlds were really cool because especially when you have these extensions that are opening things up to be broader and bigger, or like 3D, like 3D things in Beetle blocks. I think the idea of constraining it to where people can actually have not have to take it all on at once seems particularly valuable.
Yeah, actually, can I make one more comment? At the beginning of BJC, early when we were beginning to develop BJC, we were the EDC version of BJC, we had run across some special purpose app that somebody, I don't even know who, wrote at Berkeley that was a kind of a little, you know, click on Alonzo thing. And it was essentially a micro world. Mm-hmm. It put up a few blocks. It didn't tell you how to put together the, you know, the thing that you needed, but it said, make it do this. And you only had so many blocks. The advantage, even this is high school, when we were building BJC for AP computer science in high school, the problem with not having a micro world is that the very first thing that the kids are doing is not programming, but learning a bloody interface. So they're learning about the technical terms, where's the stage, the sprite corral, I mean, they have all these things that they can, that are distractions, not computer science ideas, but just features that are, they need to know in order to do anything. So we think even for a beginner, even if your intent is to open up the whole world, the first couple of days, you want something little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. So, there are some links in the chat, if people didn't see it, to the Hour of Code activity that Paul was talking about, I believe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. From Berkeley. So back to the question about integrations that might be useful, or things, or kind of this relationship between different ways to constrain environments or embed environments, and how this might be useful across extensions. You can approach it, of course, either as a dev in the technical challenges, or as a, I'll say, dreamer and just thinking about what would be great to have. But let's hear your thoughts on it, Devin, to start.
Yeah, so, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was going to say, so my perspective is going to be more so along the development side on what things we could support to do this. And one thing that I think would be really useful for just generic integrations with a bunch of different tools are kind of a standardized hook-based event system for extensions that can access a lot of features that are already inherent in Snap. So like when users click on a block, or if they edit a text field and they arrow around, change some text, I think it would be really useful for some educational tools if we could pull that kind of information out with like an event-based system. And then we would even have timing information for that. So we could feed all this information into some kind of like AI system or agent that would be able to kind of ascertain when students are struggling with something, or just general things like that. Like if they hesitate after they click an input, or if they try to run code multiple times and they get an error. So just for things like automated grading tools and teaching assistants, I think being able to pull a lot of information out is really important, and I think not really directly accessible right now, which is something I think we can work on.
Yeah, for sure. Tom Lauwers, do you have any? Thomas Price was commenting about how it describes a lot like logging. Given that Thomas Price did a lot of this logging and like work in the past with his work with iSnap. So Tom Lauwers, do you have any thoughts about integrations that you'd either like to see, or across extensions, or in general, or some of the developmental challenges?
Yeah, I've been thinking about it a little bit and trying to come up. It's like, because Snap is perfect as it is. Can't make any changes. No. There's two things that come to mind. I saw some interesting demos at CSTA around of using Scratch 3.0 with a modification for AI. And so, you know, I think Ken's done a lot of work in terms of getting machine learning models working in Snap. I just did a presentation about it also at 5 o'clock, and there is, it's possible, but I think it would be nice to try to integrate that more tightly, or make it maybe a little bit easier, especially if you're using, you know, video or audio or something like that, which Snap already supports. And then the other thought I had was around accessibility, and this is more just my ignorance, so I don't know where we are in terms of accessibility with Snap, but I know that increasingly schools are asking for more accessible tools, accessibility in terms of, you know, visual or auditory disabilities, but also other potential disabilities, and, you know, maybe mousing, you know, how easy is it to move the blocks on the screen in the first place, things like that. So I don't really know actually if there has been a conversation about that. It was literally something that just came to mind, but I thought I would throw that out there as well.
Yeah, for sure. So Michael Ball, are you, I see you're muted and it looks like your camera's off, but if you are listening and have a couple of words you'd like to say, I think he's the, he's always been the person I've asked questions about accessibility in Snap too. So I thought I would reach out just in case he was, oh, he doesn't have a mic right now. If you have any words you'd like to share and place them in the chat, I can always, of course, relay them. But without further ado, I did see that Ken Kahn has an integration question. So I might actually jump into that question. before, rather than just continuing on with this one. So Ken Khan, would you like to share your question?
Yeah, it has to do with integrating the web pages. That when I first started creating documentation for all the machine learning AI stuff, I wanted to have many, like dozens of embeddings of Snap on a page, and then that page would take many minutes to load. So I had to back off from that. But conceptually, it doesn't, all these different embeddings could be sharing the same code base and just have their own little canvas or whatever. So I don't know if there's been progress, because I haven't tried this for several years, but it seems like a fairly generally useful thing to be able to put many embeddings on the same page.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Being able to embed Snap is certainly useful when you're when I hadn't even I hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about it in the terms of documentation, but we have a separate project in Netsbox where people can post things to a gallery and see posted projects. So it's almost like working in a small class where you can see everyone's stuff, even virtually. But that's a good question. Were you trying to use iframes, or were you actually
yeah, I was.
Well,
I tried different approaches, and eventually I just ended up with, you get a screenshot, and when you click on it, it loads it right then in place or something, which was okay. But it just seemed, I did spend a little time trying to modify Snap a bit so that there'd be just one code base for multiple canvases, but it just got too hard to get it to work.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a native way, an officially supported way to embed projects. The problem is if you embed a lot of them, your page will slow down a lot. But one thing you can do is embed carousels, and I can fetch later how this is done, but this is what it will look like in your website. So you could embed a carousel of your collection in a website. And then when you click on one of these, it takes you to the project page. It's not exactly like embedding the projects themselves, but
right.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I do see a comment from Michael Ball on accessibility, just to kind of read that out in case people haven't seen it. So Michael says that accessibility is kind of all over the place. There's a lot of hard but relatively clear work we can do to make progress on general usability challenges. But the ones schools are really concerned about, like screen readers and keyboard navigation, still require a bit of work. Multiple embeddings. And he said on the comment of multiple embeddings, he's saying it mostly works, but it's not used a lot. So it means that there's still likely a lot of bugs. I know embedding Snap and Netsbox and stuff, or Snap and Snap extensions can be tricky. We kind of in the spirit of logging and stuff as well. I know we have an embedded API for Netsbox anyway, that avoids the like the security issues that you get from the opaque iframes. So that you can embed something from netsbox.org and then still like subscribe to any edits that they make. So it's kind of on the like moving blocks or things like that. So it doesn't give you everything, but I think it includes like green flag clicked events and stuff too, but edits to the project plus those. I think it would be great if we had a way to kind of standardize and unify more of these different efforts, because there are so many Snap extensions and so many of them that would get lit from all these different approaches, from micro worlds to embedding, to logging, to all these different areas. But another question I have that I'll probably pose to Thomas here is some of these Snap extensions, I think, really form their own communities, like Turtle Stitch, where Whereas there are others that I think are probably more amenable to merging into Snap. Both, and not just in terms of the technical parts, but I'm curious about any thoughts about the trade-offs between merging versus staying out of the community, or if there's, because I'm always biased when I think about it, I always think let's get everything into Snap so everyone can use everything. You can have nets blocks plus intelligent hints in a micro world, like let's put it all together. But anyway, I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that, Thomas.
Yeah, I think this brings up a lot of different ideas. One is for apps to work together, it almost seems like we would need, speaking of what most extension frameworks do well, one is a way for mods to talk to each other. To say, hey, I'm going to change these functions, so lay off of them. Or, I'm adding these resources, you can access them. Again, that's extra work to add, but it makes it possible to integrate things. In terms of should we have these separate communities or should we integrate into Snap? There are obvious cases where forming your own community makes sense when you're fundamentally changing the Snap experience. But things like a game engine would make sense to just be an add-on that you can add on and maybe combine with a microbit, right? Like, what if my controller is now a microbit? That would be amazing. So for those, I think it does make sense to bring them all together. I think what this raises, and maybe what we need is like a package manager. We need npm for Snap, but those sorts of things would take a lot of concerted dev effort, and it's not just going to happen by itself. So I think maybe the most important question to ask is, what are the incentives? What are the incentives for the dev time that it takes to make these things play together? I think we come from a variety of communities. Many of us have at least one foot in academia. And the incentive there is often research. So it's hard to get money specifically just to build things that do cool stuff for kids, but sometimes you can. So what is it that would make, what is it that would make you invest a lot of hours, or to hire someone, or, to work with a student to put in a number of hours to make to make an extension framework that's really robust? Because I think what we have now is the Snap team saying, like, we value extensions, we want this work, we're going to put some effort into it, but they have a million other things on their plate. It's not their top priority. So what would make it worth it for some party to put in the dev time? Because imagining what it could be is awesome, but unless someone has the time to implement some of that, then we're going to essentially ask, what is the simplest way? And the simplest way is, I'm going to fork Snap at this point, host it myself, and have my own website. So I would love to know, like what could, let's dream in a way that thinks about what would make it worth it to put in some of that dev time. For me, for example, it would be if I could put my things in front of BJC teachers as sort of a default, or even maybe not default, but as an easy option, right? That there's a quick choice to make. And if there's some way for me to conduct research in that context, if I could do those two things, that would be many dev hours that it would be worthwhile for me to put in. So I think it's worth asking where that time is going to come from and from whom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I definitely share the sentiment that would be so useful to be able to have an easy way for the larger Snap community like BJC or like teachers using the BJC curriculum and stuff to be able to access some of these extensions, even if they're experimental extensions, to be able, and in a way that lets the developer get feedback, or the researcher, get collect data and stuff. That would be super cool. Bernat, do you have any? Okay, sorry,
Yes.
go for it.
So can I interrupt you?
Of
Sorry,
course.
hi. I also maybe I just posted some smileys because of course for at Turtle Stitch we are investing a lot of time in setting up everything for all the users who are involved. And as I understood your question correctly, Thomas, you asked about what make people do this. Is this correct? Or
I mean, beyond just the passion project.
Yeah.
That runs
I
into
mean,
maintainability issues that
Yes,
Bernat was
yes.
mentioning.
Passion is, of course, the biggest motivation. But I mean, in the end, we also try to involve it in other projects and to use it locally. And I mean, we also have got to try and run for money to get all the development done, because a lot of it takes a lot of time to do that. Yeah, and speaking from my perspective, I mean, Michael Aschauer is also here in this session, who is doing the development work. I mean, I would also be positive about implementing Turtle Stitch within a Snap, but I think the community is a big thing, and I don't really know how to do this if it is if it would be combined with Snap. So I maybe we find a little bit of time to talk about this here in Heidelberg too with Jens, as we meet personally after a long period now.
So if I may chime in, the reason why, in the case of BeetleBox and Turtle Stitch in particular, the reason why we forked, why we created our own communities, let's say, is that back then there was no Snap community. There was no community website, and the Snap API didn't have the Snap Cloud API didn't have any endpoints for social things that we wanted to have in our websites. So basically the only option was to create a new one, right? It's actually the other way around. The Snap community site and new cloud was born out of the BeetleBox one. So I think for new extensions, again, nowadays it should be much easier. We already have a community site, and I don't think you should split if you create a new extension nowadays. But back then it was the only option, I think. And actually, in the beginning, in BeetleBox, we were using the Snap Cloud, and you could see your 3D projects mixed with your Snap 2D projects, but you could not open the 3D ones in the regular Snap version and vice versa. But then when we started needing social features, we decided that we had to build our own thing.
Makes sense.
So I think the challenge is to think how we can get some of these older extensions reconciled with the new mechanisms in Snap and the new community side and so on. But for newer ones, I think the problem is mostly solved, mostly. I mean, we've been able to integrate TuneScope, for example, and Eckart's huge size Snap extension. So there's sort of a proof that the new extension mechanism is good enough for most things.
I think one of the hard things with some of these Snap extensions is that some of them change the UI more, and I'm sure Thomas could also speak to this quite a bit. And Bernat, obviously you could too with BeetleBox. but I like in Netsbox, you have the room tab with the network that gives you like the kind of like your network debugger. And then I know like iSnap, as Thomas showed, you have these hint dialogues and other notifications and things like that. And I'm wondering if there's a common set of features that's the next tier. So right now you kind of covered, I think Snap covered a lot of the main extensions, or a majority of them, with which are just providing custom blocks, custom categories, things like that. But what's the next tier of features that would need to be supported to kind of pull in again, then the next level of extensions.
Debugging is something I'd like to work on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, are you thinking about providing more support for student debugging or debugging block projects?
Yeah,
Or debugging? Yeah, I
Debugging
totally agree.
We had started down that road a little bit in the old BYOB version, but we don't really have, I mean, in a certain sense, we have everything we need, but the user interface is not discoverable. So that needs work.
Yeah, that makes sense. It looks like Thomas Price is sharing a prototype debugger for movement in pens. That looks like another interesting extension.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is an example of something that would seamlessly work with any other app. It's just a layer of functionality. So I think there are a lot of these that are smaller, right? Like when you talk about something like, you know, iSnap or Turtle Stitch, then those are pretty huge changes to the way that Snap is used. But there are some things that just add a tiny little piece of nice functionality. You know, those quality of life extensions that I think it would be nice if we sort of extracted, shared, and integrated.
Thomas, do you mind actually sharing a quick demo of the link that you posted?
So this is a common spiral pattern, and this is borrowing some inspiration from a few other people, but essentially if you hover over any of these blocks, then it will show you what the turtle did when that block ran. So when I went to 0, 0, that's where the turtle went. When it cleared or put the pen down, it was in the center, and set size to 10. But if I hover over a repeat block, it shows me the entirety of what the turtle did during that repeat, or the inner repeat, it shows me the 4 movements that it made, and then it repeats it over and over again. If I look at the turns, it shows me where those happened. Some of these things are probably not necessary. Students maybe internalize where turning happens, but I think for some students, it's actually not clear how the code relates to the output. So that was the goal here. What is the variable doing? We can see how the variable changes throughout the whole, and obviously movement is everything, but you can play around with this. It's not a static example, so I could change this to 40 degrees and it would still be able to do that. So I bring it up just because it's a nice example of probably not an ideal way to do debugging, but one idea that a teacher might want to use or play around with. And I don't know how to, you know, like what maintaining that would be work if I put it out there. That's the reason I haven't shared it, right? Is that it as Snap changed, I would have to update that code. So that's why it doesn't make sense as an extension under the current framework, is because to capture an execution trace involves going under the hood a whole lot. But if I could lock it to a specific version of Snap, then that would be easy. So I've hosted my own, but it'd be nice if that was still accessible from the primary Berkeley site so that a teacher could use it if they wanted to. And I'm sure there are a million other examples of nice things people have built like that.
Yeah, I really like that example also shows the creative ways that people can make these extensions too. Because it's so easy to think about them as like new blocks or things like that, but some of these are much more intricate and requiring changes to, like, again, execution traces, for example, in this case. But it makes me wonder if there's like I don't know, maybe the next set of features that would be required to bring in you know, the next, I guess, tier of extensions would be just like menu items, for example, or something like that, where there's some more configurability or some another level of change where you can actually change the UI or something past just custom blocks.
Yeah, I think one way to analyze it is to look at it on a spectrum because I was thinking about the very first version of Snap that I made work with our robots in 2013. I did fork the Snap source code. And then in 2014, the Snap team introduced the HTTP block, which allowed me to then use normal Snap and communicate over a local server to the robots. So if you think about it from a spectrum of like, it's just a blocks extension that doesn't require anything special, all the way to, we're changing the UI and we're also adding networking and we're doing all this other stuff, so it becomes a question of, okay, of all of the extensions that have been built, of the ones that needed to kind of fork Snap for some reason, why did they need to do so? What were the reasons? And then if you look at the commonalities there, maybe there's some low-hanging fruit of, okay, well, if we just make this thing, like if we just make it possible to, native Snap extensions that affect this part of the UI, then, half of the reasons for forking Snap go away. So yeah, I mean, I'm not volunteering to do that analysis, but it's one way to analyze the kind of the ecosystem, I guess, to look at where to go next.
Yeah, for sure.
Hi, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but this is the end of the hour-long session. I want to remind everyone that as this is the end of session D, you have a 15-minute break before the social event. I'll leave the Zoom open for one more minute and then to finish up and then close it out.
Sounds great. Thank you, Jordan, and thank you everyone for attending. Especially thanks to our panelists for taking on all these different questions from all these different people over the last hour. And hopefully everyone enjoys the break and the social hour to follow.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye all, and thank you.